There is a quiet moment that most English learners never notice. It is the moment right before you speak. That tiny pause, that breath, that hesitation. Most people try to eliminate it. They rush through it. They feel embarrassed by it. But that moment is not weakness. It is awareness. And when you learn to slow down your English, that moment becomes your greatest teacher. Many learners believe that speaking English well means speaking fast. They think fluency sounds like speed. They think confidence sounds like nonstop words. But speed is not understanding, and noise is not clarity. In fact, when you speak too fast, your mind often runs ahead of your meaning. Your mouth moves faster than your thoughts can settle. Your sentences become reactions instead of expressions. Slowing down your English is not about sounding less fluent. It is about sounding more real, more present, more grounded. When you slow down, you start to hear your own voice differently. You notice the shape of each sentence. You feel where a word fits naturally. You sense when a phrase is finished, instead of forcing it forward. This is where real English begins. Not in grammar books, not in vocabulary lists, but in awareness. Most people learn English by accumulation. More words, more rules, more patterns. But few people learn English by subtraction, by removing urgency, by removing pressure, by removing the fear of silence. Silence is not your enemy. Silence is where understanding lives. When you allow yourself to pause, your brain stops panicking. It stops searching desperately for the correct sentence. Instead, it listens. And listening is the foundation of speaking. Slow English trains your brain to think in meaning first, not in translation. You stop asking, "How do I say this in English?" and start asking, "What do I really want to say?" That shift changes everything, because language is not about replacing words. It is about expressing intention. When you rush, your intention gets lost. When you slow down, your intention becomes clear. This is why people who speak slowly often sound more confident, not because they know more words, but because they are not afraid of space. They are not afraid to let a sentence breathe. They are not afraid to let a thought land. Think about the people you trust most when they speak. They are rarely the fastest speakers. They are the ones who choose their words carefully. They allow silence to exist. They give you time to follow their thoughts. That is the kind of English you are learning here. English that feels calm. English that feels human. English that does not rush to impress. When you slow down, something else happens. Your pronunciation improves naturally. Not because you practice sounds harder, but because your mouth finally has time to shape them. Speed hides mistakes. Slowness reveals them gently. When you speak slowly, you hear where your stress is wrong. You feel when a sound is unclear. You notice when your intonation falls flat. And instead of judging yourself, you adjust. Slow learning is kind learning. Fast learning often feels aggressive. It pushes, it demands, it compares. Slow learning listens, it waits, it responds. This is especially important if you have spent years feeling nervous about English. If your heart speeds up when someone speaks to you, if your mind goes blank in conversations, if you feel tired after speaking, that tiredness does not come from English itself. It comes from pressure. Pressure to be correct. Pressure to be fast. Pressure to sound like someone else. Slow pace. English removes that pressure. It gives you permission to be where you are, not where you think you should be. And when you stop fighting yourself, progress begins quietly. You start to remember words more easily. You start to connect ideas more naturally. You start to enjoy listening instead of fearing it. Because your brain is no longer in survival mode, it is in learning mode. This is why slow English is not just a speaking style, it is a way of thinking. You stop chasing fluency. You allow fluency to grow. You stop performing. Say you start communicating. At first, slowing down feels uncomfortable. Silence feels loud. Pauses feel awkward. But that discomfort is just unfamiliarity, not failure. Your brain has been trained to fill every gap, to avoid silence, to keep moving. When you resist that habit, you are retraining your mind. You are teaching it that it is safe to slow down, safe to think, safe to feel. And this safety creates depth. Depth in understanding, depth in expression, depth in confidence. You begin to trust that your English does not disappear when you pause. It becomes clearer. This is the moment when English stops being a test and starts being a tool for reflection, a tool for connection, a tool for honesty. Slow English allows your personality to come through, not just your knowledge. You sound more like yourself, not like a textbook, not like a memorized script. And people respond to that. They listen, they feel comfortable, they engage. Because real communication is not about perfection, it is about presence. If you take one thing from this part, let it be this. Fluency is not speed. Fluency is flow. And flow cannot exist under pressure. Flow needs space. Flow needs patience. Flow needs trust. So today, when you listen to English, do not rush to understand every word. Let the meaning come to you. When you speak, do not rush to finish your sentence. Let your thoughts settle first. You are not behind. You are not slow. You are learning deeply. And deep learning lasts. This pace may feel quiet, but quiet things grow roots. And roots are what hold language inside you, long after memorized phrases fade away. And when you begin to accept this slower rhythm, something very subtle starts to change inside your mind. You stop treating English as something you must control. You stop forcing it to obey you. You stop demanding immediate results from every sentence you hear or speak. Instead, you allow English to arrive at its own pace. Most learners never experience this shift because they are trained to chase certainty. They want to understand everything. They want to respond immediately. They want to sound correct all the time. But language does not grow under pressure. It grows under trust. When you slow down, your relationship with English becomes softer, less confrontational, less judgmental. You no longer ask, "Did I say that right?" You begin to ask, "Did I express what I felt?" That difference is quiet, but it is enormous. High because the human brain remembers emotions more deeply than rules. It remembers calm moments. It remembers safety. It remembers when learning felt gentle instead of stressful. This is why children learn languages so naturally, not because they are smarter, but because they are not afraid of silence. They are not afraid of mistakes. They are not afraid of time. Adults often lose this ability because they carry fear into every sentence. Fear of sounding foolish. Fear of being corrected. Fear of being slow. Slow pace. English is about unlearning that fear. It invites you to stay inside a sentence a little longer, to feel its rhythm, to notice how meaning unfolds, not all at once, but gradually. When you listen slowly, you stop translating word by word. You stop grabbing at fragments. You allow the message to form as a whole. This is how native understanding works, not through speed, but through pattern recognition. Your brain begins to recognize familiar shapes of meaning. You stop hearing individual words. You start hearing intentions, and intentions are much easier to remember. This is also why slowing down helps with listening fatigue. If you have ever felt exhausted after listening to English for a short time, it is not because English is hard. It is because you are trying to process too much, too quickly. Your brain is constantly racing to keep up. It never rests. It never settles. But when you slow the pace, your brain can breathe. It stops sprinting. It starts walking. And walking allows you to notice details. You begin to hear tone. You begin to feel mood. You begin to sense when a speaker is unsure, confident, gentle, or firm. These are things grammar books cannot teach, but they are essential for real communication. Slow-pace English trains your emotional ear, not just your logical ear. You learn how English feels, not just how it functions. This emotional familiarity builds confidence quietly, not the loud confidence of performance, but the steady confidence of understanding. You no longer panic when you miss a word. You trust that meaning will still reach you. You no longer rush to respond. You trust that silence is allowed. This trust changes how others perceive you. People often feel more comfortable speaking with someone who is not in a hurry, someone who listens fully, someone who does not interrupt themselves with anxiety. Your calm becomes contagious. And this is where English stops being about you alone. It becomes about connection. When you speak slowly, people listen differently. They lean in. They relax. They sense intention. They are not measuring your grammar. They are following your thought. This is a powerful shift, especially if you have spent years feeling judged by your English. Slowness disarms judgment. It removes urgency. It creates space for humanity. Many learners think they must earn the right to slow down. They believe slowness is a luxury reserved for advanced speakers. But the truth is the opposite. Slowness is how you become advanced. Not advanced in speed. Advanced in depth. Depth means you can stay with a thought. Depth means you can explain something simply. Depth means you are not afraid of repetition. Fast speakers often repeat without realizing it. Slow speakers repeat with intention. They clarify, they refine. They guide the listener. This is why slow English sounds thoughtful. Because it is. When you allow yourself to slow down, you also become more honest. You stop hiding behind memorized phrases. You stop performing fluency. You start choosing words that feel true. Sometimes that means your sentence is shorter. Sometimes it means you pause longer. Sometimes it means you say, "Let me think." And that is not weakness. That is maturity. Real communication includes thinking. It includes uncertainty. It includes reflection. Slow pace. English gives you permission to include those things. It reminds you that English is not a race. No one is timing you. No one is scoring you. The only real question is, did understanding happen? And understanding does not require speed. It requires presence. Presence is built through attention. Attention grows when the pace is gentle. This is why rushing always feels shallow, and slowness always feels meaningful. As you continue listening and speaking at this pace, your relationship with mistakes changes. Mistakes stop feeling like failures. They become information. You notice them calmly. You adjust naturally. You move on without emotional weight. This is how confidence becomes stable. not through avoiding mistakes, but through not fearing them. Slow learning builds resilience. Fast learning often builds anxiety, and anxiety blocks memory. If you want English to stay with you, it must feel safe. Not exciting, not impressive, safe. Safety allows repetition. Safety allows curiosity. Safety allows rest. And rest is where integration happens. This is why sometimes you understand more when you do less. When you listen shorter, when you speak less, when you pause more. Your brain needs time to organize what it receives. Without time, information stays scattered. With time, it becomes knowledge. Slow pace. English respects this process. It does not rush insight, it allows it to surface naturally. And when insight comes naturally, it stays. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not missing anything. You are simply choosing a different depth. A depth where English is not something you chase, but something that gradually becomes part of you. And as this sense of depth begins to settle inside you, you may notice another quiet change that is easy to overlook. Your inner voice starts to slow down too. Most English learners focus only on the external side of language, the sounds, the sentences, the conversations. But the real struggle often happens internally, in the voice that comments, judges, and rushes you from the inside. That inner voice is usually the fastest speaker of all. It interrupts, it criticizes, it demands speed. When you slow your English on the outside, that inner voice does not immediately follow. At first, it resists. It becomes louder. It urges you to hurry. But if you continue at this slower pace, something interesting happens. The inner voice loses its urgency. It begins to speak more softly, more patiently, more kindly. This is an important moment in language learning, because many difficulties with English are not linguistic. They are emotional. Fear speeds the mind. Calm slows it down. When your mind is calmer, your thoughts organize themselves more clearly. You no longer feel pushed from the inside. Now you feel guided. This guidance changes how you choose words. Instead of grabbing the first word that appears, you wait. You allow better words to surface. Waiting does not mean hesitating. It means listening inwardly. You listen to what you actually want to express, not what you think you should say. This is why slow English often sounds more sincere. It comes from alignment between thought and speech, between intention and expression. Fast speech often skips this alignment. Slow speech allows it. As this alignment grows, you may notice that your vocabulary begins to feel different. Words are no longer just tools you pull from memory. They become textures. They carry tone. They carry emotion. You start to feel the difference between words that are similar in meaning, but different in feeling. You sense which word feels heavy, which feels light, which feels distant, which feels warm. This sensitivity cannot be rushed. It grows only when you give language time to resonate inside you. This is also why slow listening is just as important as slow speaking. When you listen slowly, you are not just decoding sound. You are absorbing rhythm. Rhythm teaches you where English breathes, where it pauses, where it emphasizes. You begin to feel sentences instead of calculating them. And when you feel language, you remember it more naturally. Memory does not respond well to pressure. It responds to familiarity. Slow pace. English creates familiarity, not through repetition alone, but through comfort. You hear similar structures again and again, but each time without stress. Your brain says, I have been here before. And it relaxes. See, relaxation allows patterns to settle. Patterns become instinct. Instinct becomes fluency. This is how fluency grows quietly, without dramatic moments, without sudden breakthroughs, just steady integration. Another thing that changes at this pace is your relationship with mistakes in real conversations. When you are slow, mistakes do not shock you. They pass through. You notice them, but you do not freeze. You correct gently, or you continue. Either way, communication survives. This survival builds trust. Trust in your ability to stay present even when English is imperfect. And presence is more valuable than precision. People do not remember how correct you were. They remember how you made them feel. Slow English allows you to feel present with others. You listen fully. You respond thoughtfully. You are not mentally rehearsing your next sentence while they are still speaking. This presence is rare, and it is deeply appreciated. In a world that rushes constantly, slowness feels like care. When you speak slowly, you signal that the moment matters, that the conversation matters, that the person matters. This is why slow speakers often create deeper connections, not because of language skill alone, but because of attention. Attention is a form of respect. As you continue learning at this pace, you may also notice changes outside of English. Your patience increases. Your tolerance for silence grows. Your ability to sit with uncertainty improves. These are not side effects. They are part of the same process. Language learning reflects how you relate to life. If you rush language, you often rush yourself. If you slow language, might you begin to treat yourself more gently. This gentleness is not weakness, it is sustainability. Fast effort burns out. Slow effort endures. This is especially important if English is something you plan to live with for years. Not just pass a test, not just complete a course. Living with a language requires peace, not constant effort. Slow pace. English helps you build that peace. You begin to trust that understanding will come, that words will appear when needed, that silence will not harm you. This trust frees mental space, and in that space, creativity emerges. You start forming your own sentences, not copied, not memorized, but shaped by your own thinking. This is the moment when English stops feeling foreign. It starts feeling personal. Personal language does not rush. It reflects. It allows meaning to unfold gradually, just like thought itself. And as thought slows, depth increases. You are no longer skating on the surface of language. You are moving through it. This movement is calm, steady, unforced, and it prepares you for something important. Because true fluency is not tested in perfect conditions. It is tested when you are tired, when you are emotional, when you are unsure. Slow learning builds stability for those moments. It gives you a center you can return to, a pace that feels natural, a voice that feels like yours. And from that center, English continues to grow, quietly, patiently, without pushing. And from that calm center, something even deeper begins to form, something that many learners never reach because they leave too early. You start to build an identity in English, not an identity based on performance, not an identity based on how fluent you sound, but an identity based on how you exist while using the language. This is a quiet shift, almost invisible. But once it happens, English stops feeling like a separate skill. It becomes a space you can inhabit. Before this point, English often feels like a task, something you step into, perform, and step out of. You speak, you finish, you return to yourself. But now, there is no sharp transition. You remain yourself while speaking English. This is what slow learning allows. Continuity. Continuity between languages. Continuity between thoughts. Continuity between who you are and how you speak. At this stage, you no longer measure your English by outcomes. You do not ask whether a conversation was successful. You ask whether it felt honest. Honesty becomes the new compass. You begin to notice when a sentence feels forced, when a word does not belong, when you are imitating instead of expressing. And because you are no longer rushing, you allow yourself to correct course gently. You restate, you clarify, you soften. This self-correction is calm, not reactive. It does not come from fear, it comes from care. Care for meaning, care for connection. Slow pace. English nurtures this care. It teaches you that communication is not about dominance, not about impressing, but about meeting. Meeting another person where they are. Meeting yourself where you are. This meeting requires stillness, because you cannot meet anyone while running. As your pace stabilizes, you may also notice that your relationship with silence changes again. Silence is no longer just a pause. It becomes a presence. You begin to use silence intentionally, not to escape, but to allow space. Space for thought, space for feeling, space for response. In conversations, this space invites others in. They feel heard, they feel respected, they feel safe to speak. This safety transforms interactions. People open up more, they slow down with you, they become more real, and you realize something important. Your English does not need to be perfect to create depth. It needs to be sincere. Sincerity carries weight, even through simple words, even through imperfect grammar. This is why slow speakers often leave stronger impressions. Their words land. They stay. Speed passes through. Slowness settles. At this depth, learning English no longer feels separate from living. You notice English in moments of reflection, in quiet walks, in internal dialogues. Your inner world begins to include English naturally, not because you force it, but because it fits. This is integration. Integration cannot be rushed. It happens when the nervous system feels safe, when the mind is not pressured, when attention is steady. Slow pace. English creates the conditions for this integration. And once integration begins, motivation changes. You no longer learn because you should. You learn because you are curious. Curiosity replaces obligation. Interest replaces discipline. This is a much more sustainable energy. You listen because you want to understand. You speak because you want to express, not because you are proving something. At this point, even mistakes feel different. They do not interrupt your sense of self. They do not make you feel smaller. They are simply part of the flow. Flow becomes the dominant experience, not effort, not tension. Flow does not mean ease all the time. It means continuity. It means you stay connected even when something is unclear. This connection is the real achievement. Many learners chase fluency. Few learners build continuity. Continuity allows you to live in the language, not visit it. And living in a language requires patience, just like living with another person, just like living with yourself. You cannot rush intimacy. You cannot rush familiarity. Slow pace. English respects this truth. It does not promise fast results. It promises deep roots. Roots grow quietly, underground, invisible for a long time. But once they are there, growth becomes stable. This is the stage where English begins to support you instead of draining you. You draw energy from it. You think through it. You reflect with it. It becomes part of your internal landscape. And this is why, when challenges appear, you do not collapse. When conversations become complex, when emotions rise, when words are hard to find, you remain present. Presence has become your skill, not speed, not complexity. Presence. And presence carries you further than any technique ever could. And as this sense of presence becomes more familiar, you may notice that time itself feels different when you use English. Conversations no longer feel rushed. Listening no longer feels like chasing. Speaking no longer feels like standing on a stage. Time stretches, not in a dramatic way, but in a gentle, breathable way. This is one of the clearest signs that language is settling inside you. When time slows down, understanding deepens. You hear more than words. You sense meaning before it is fully formed. This ability cannot be trained through drills. It emerges through patience. Patience allows your mind to stay open. When the mind is open, it receives more than it demands. Slow pace. English trains this openness. You stop bracing yourself against the language. You stop preparing for impact. You stop expecting failure. Instead, you stay receptive. Receptiveness changes how you listen to others. You are no longer waiting for your turn. You are genuinely following their thought. And when it is your turn to speak, your response feels connected, not separate, not rehearsed. Connection becomes the thread that holds communication together. This thread is fragile under speed, but strong under slowness. Speed snaps attention. Slowness weaves it. As you weave this attention again and again, your confidence becomes quieter, less visible, but more solid. You no longer need to announce your ability. You simply speak. This quiet confidence is difficult to explain to those who measure progress only through output, through longer sentences, through advanced vocabulary, through complexity. But complexity without grounding feels hollow. It floats. It disappears under pressure. Grounded language stays. Slow pace. English grounds you, in your body, in your breath, in your thought. You begin to notice your breathing while you speak, not consciously, but naturally. Breath becomes part of your rhythm, and rhythm supports clarity. When breath is steady, words follow more easily. When breath is rushed, words scatter. This is why slowing down physically helps language mentally. They are not separate systems. They are deeply connected. Your nervous system listens before your brain does. If your body feels rushed, your mind will too. Slow pace. English calms the body first, and from that calm, language flows. This flow is not dramatic. It does not rush in waves. It moves like a river. Sometimes slowly, sometimes faster, but always continuous. Continuity is what keeps you inside the language, even when you do not know the exact word, even when a sentence is incomplete, even when silence appears. You do not fall out of English anymore. You stay within it. This staying is powerful, because many learners struggle not with speaking, but with returning. Returning after a pause, returning after a mistake, returning after confusion. Slow learning removes the fear of return. There is nowhere to return to. You never left. English is no longer a performance space. It is a living space. You move inside it. You adjust. You rest. You continue. At this depth, progress becomes almost invisible. There are no milestones, no sudden jumps. But one day, you realize something quietly. You are no longer translating in your head. You are no longer preparing sentences in advance. You are no longer monitoring yourself constantly. You are simply present. This presence does not mean perfection, it means availability. You are available to the moment, available to meaning, available to connection, and availability is the heart of communication. This is why slow English feels human. It mirrors how we think, how we feel, how we relate. Human processes are not fast. They are layered. They unfold. By respecting this unfolding, you align language with life. You stop forcing both. And when force disappears, resistance fades. English stops pushing back. It stops feeling heavy. It stops draining you. Instead, it supports you. It accompanies you. You carry it lightly. This lightness does not come from simplicity. It comes from familiarity. Familiar things do not need effort. They belong. At this stage, English belongs to you, not as a possession, but as a companion. It walks with you, at your pace, without urgency. And because there is no urgency, learning continues, quietly, steadily, deeply. And when you finally look back, you may realize that nothing dramatic happened. There was no moment when English suddenly became easy. No single sentence that changed everything. No clear line between before and after. Instead, English slowly became quieter inside you. Less demanding, less intimidating, less urgent. It stopped asking you to prove yourself. It stopped testing you. It stopped rushing you. It simply stayed. And because it stayed, you stayed with it. You learned that understanding does not arrive through force, but through familiarity. That confidence does not grow from speed, but from steadiness. That fluency is not something you reach, but something you live inside. You learned that speaking less can mean understanding more, that pausing can be part of communication, that silence can carry meaning. Most importantly, you learned that you do not need to change who you are to use English well. You only need to let English move at the same pace as your thinking, your breathing, your living. Slowly, English stopped being something outside of you. It became something that walks with you, quietly, patiently, without pressure. And that is enough, because language that grows without fear stays with you for life.